Nicole, who's supposed to welcome you. She's our chief of staff, but she's sick. And then it's supposed to be Marta, who's our evangelization director, and she's sick. And I'm healthy. And the difference between them is they drink wine and I drink vodka. And so, I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying that's what I'm doing. And look at me, I'm just fine. It's just overjoyed to have you here at St. Clement. We are visiting with us. Thank you so much for making this evening and joining us. If you're looking for chairs, there are chairs right here in the front. So we'd love you to sit in the front. Just thank you for making space in this busy Advent season. To just listen and be in community. That's what Christmas is about. It puts us in communion with God Himself through Jesus. And it reminds us that we are all family of God. And so thank you for joining us. It really is an incredible blessing for us to have Father Timothy with us this evening here at St. Clement. Father Timothy done many amazing things in his life. He resides now in Oxford, where he teaches and leads retreats and writes, and he will speak a lot today about the question of questioning God, which is really the title of his newest book. I think there's still some books. You can get them on the way out when you will be leaving today. It is a quite amazing book to read. The other book that he wrote that I find very insightful is What is the Point of Being a Christian, when he wrestled with this question of what really Christianity is meant to be. He was a master of the Dominican Order, of the World Dominican Order from late 90s to early 2000s. He really is one of the brilliant theologians in the Catholic Church, a friend to many saints and many really very thoughtful women and men who help us to be in a relationship with Jesus. He also apparently gives retreats to popes. So we thought, well, if he's good for Pope Francis, we love Pope Francis here at St. Clement. And therefore we thought, well, we might really love him to that. So we're just overjoyed to have him, especially since on Saturday he is actually on his way back to London. So it's a short stop, and we're just so grateful that out of all the stuff he could do tonight, he is with us tonight to really help us to ask this question around God. So please join me in welcoming Father Timothy.
Good evening. I feel very quite moved to see so many people here. And when I look at you, I just love to get to know you before I prepare this talk. You look at these people and you wonder, who are they? What moves them? What touches them? And so I hope that what I say will mean something to you. And it won't be like one of my brethren who was the provincial of the Western Province. And he gave a talk here in Chicago. And when he sat down, there was a terrible silence. And he said to the man beside him, I hope it wasn't that bad, was it? And the man said, oh, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. I just blame whoever asked you to come and speak at the
Oh.
Father Peter. Peter asked me to come and talk about this book, my latest book, Questioning God, which I wrote with Łukasz Popko. And this is the perfect place to come and talk about it. Because your church, your beautiful church, is actually modeled on San Clemente in Rome, a place that I know and love. During the synod, I used to escape whenever I could to San Clemente, home of the Irish Dominicans in Rome, and they welcomed me, even though I'm ashamed to say that I'm entirely English. I haven't had a chance to look at the mosaics, but I gather they're pretty well the same, except for here, Jesus' eyes are open, whereas in Rome they're closed. And you've got a parrot.
Yes.
So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to learn, Peter, that you like drinking vodka. So I now know what I've got to look forward to at the end of the evening. Monsignor Radcliffe, who designed that church, who brought in a Russian priest, loved art. And he knew that one of the most important ways of preaching in our time is through beauty. Dostoevsky said, beauty will save the world. And we will only touch people's imagination if we're able to use beauty in all its forms. And that's why, for this book, we chose illustrations, beautiful illustrations for every conversation with God. And I think often they speak better, actually, than we do. We had thought of having a piece of music for every conversation, but that turned out to be a bit complicated. So this book consists of 18 conversations between Łukasz and myself, about 18 conversations between God and humanity in the Bible. And I suppose my role this evening is to tell you what a wonderful book this is, that I hope you'll buy lots of copies, give everybody copies for Christmas. But I must be honest. When I finished this book, I was less confident about it than any book I've ever written, and I've written quite a lot. I wondered whether our rambling conversations would actually be of any interest to anybody at all. And so when it was published, I waited with gloom for reactions and reviews. Łukasz was much more confident, and I'm not quite sure, but it looks as if he was right. Because we've sold out the first edition, and the Italian edition is right up among the top bestsellers. So I'm surprised. I'm delighted. My bursar is even more delighted. But why? And that's what I want to explore with you briefly this evening. Let me begin by saying how it came to be written. I had a month sabbatical in the École Biblique, the biblical school in Jerusalem, which is run by the Dominican Order. And I was going to study with a very bright young American Dominican called Anthony Giambrone. But he was sick, stuck in Washington, and he couldn't make it. So I had time on my hands. And I found that I enjoyed having breakfast with this young Poe. Now normally I hate talking to anybody for breakfast. But we got on, and we found that we loved talking about the Bible together. It became a deep pleasure. St. Catherine of Siena said there is no greater pleasure than to talk to your friends about God. And so this book was born of that pleasure. Now, part of the joy of it was that we're so different. Łukasz is 34 years younger than me, and you will be saying, well, that must make him a teenager. All right. He's Polish. Well, you know about the Poles. Also, he is a brilliant academic. He's fluent in 12 ancient and modern languages, probably one of the top experts in Hebrew in the world. But it's this difference, the fact that we're different, that I think makes conversation enjoyable. The temptation in our society is to be caught in a little silo, a little bubble, where you talk to people who think as you do, vote as you do. On dating sites in the USA, the first question is, what party do you belong to? Because it cannot be imagined you'd want to marry somebody from the other side. But Ukesh and I enjoyed our differences, and there was no rivalry. And I think that's the greatest joy you can have, is a friendship without competition, where there's no rivalry. Ukesh was already well known as a biblical scholar, but I felt he needed to be introduced to the world as an imaginative preacher. So I had this idea, April the 22nd, 2021, not that long ago, let's write a book. 5 days later, he said yes, and here are 15 conversations we could look at. 9 of them ended up in the book. And then one day later, something awful happened, but which is intrinsic to the writing of this book. I had a meeting with my surgeon, and he told me that I had cancer of the jaw. He said, this is going to be a really big one. A friend of mine who's a medical doctor said, it's better not to have the operation. She said, it's so gruesome, you will end up disfigured, and you will probably never be able to speak in public again. Anyway, I talked to the surgeon, and with some nervousness we went ahead, and it was gruesome, 17-hour operation. When they gave me the anesthetic at 8 in the morning, I said, will I be conscious by this afternoon? And she said, tomorrow afternoon. And it was extraordinary. They removed several inches of my jaw and rebuilt it from bone from my leg. Now, I've often put my foot in it, but I never put my leg in it. And I only mention this because this was an intrinsic part of writing this book. I wrote it as I prepared to go into the operation. And then you had the weeks afterwards, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything. And the rest of it was written as I slowly recovered. Now you'd think that this might make this book gloomy, but it didn't, I hope, because it was a time of extraordinary blessings. For 5 weeks I couldn't talk, I couldn't walk, I couldn't eat. Worst of all, I couldn't drink. I dreamt of a glass of water, thinking of which. I couldn't even pray, except for to say, oh God, my God, for you I thirst. And often we're tempted to think that we matter, that we're loved by God because we've what we've done, our achievements. Look at all the good things I've done. Have you seen God, the latest book I've written? I hope you've noted it down. But for all those weeks, I could produce no activity. I was just a beached whale, one body among many. And then I discovered that I was loved not because of anything I'd done or could do. Utterly, freely, unconditionally, pure gift. And that was a great joy. That was a great blessing. And I hope that it overflows a bit into this book. And I was kept going because I had these conversations with Lukash. I had a project. Instead of just lying in bed waiting to die. And here I am, 2 and a bit years later, not much uglier than I was before. And as you can see, more or less able to speak. Often people think that the Bible is God telling us what to do. Obey, or I'll zap you. But the Catholic understanding of Revelation is quite different. In our tradition, Revelation is God's conversation with us, by which we become his friends. Pope Benedict, just to show I'm not making this up, the novelty of biblical revelation consists in the fact that God becomes made known through the dialogue he wishes to have with us. So revelation is becoming at home in conversation with God. You know, most of us grew up, we became human in the conversation of our parents, of listening to our mother and father. And we grow into holiness inside that conversation, which is the life of God. So revelation isn't receiving messages from outer space. And biblical scholars aren't trying to decipher them, you know, like Turing and Bletchley Park during the war. It's being taken up into healing conversation. And the whole of the Bible is filled with passionate conversation. Often joyful, loving, sometimes angry, frustrated. Our Jewish cousins understand better than we do that it's okay to be angry with God. If you belong to the household, if you are part of God's family, of course, you have every right to be angry. Let it rip. God knows what you think already. He's not going to be shocked. So, of course, the Word of God became human in a man of conversation. Think just of John's Gospel. It's one conversation after another, with his friends, with his enemies, with people who are puzzled, until Pilate says, "What is truth?" And famously did not wait for an answer. And then you get the silence of the cross. And the resurrection, the conversation begins again. Mary Magdalene's in the garden. She hears a voice, "Mary, Rabboni." And the conversation now will never end. Perhaps some people are helped a little bit by this little book because it explores how is it that we talk to God and God talks to us. It's interesting. You might think you need to be terribly clever to talk to God. But actually, God often chooses the people who are rather inarticulate. Moses was a stutterer. Or Jeremiah the prophet. Do you know what Jeremiah's first words were? Inarticulate, struggling for words. Or Jonah, who says the silliest things. Or Peter, who's always putting his foot in it. And Jesus chose not great university graduates from Oxford. He chose 12 simple, uneducated people to be his speakers. He chooses people, that is to say, like us. When I told my Benedictine great uncle that I wanted to be a Dominican, he said, "I don't think that's a good idea." He said, "They're terribly intelligent." I don't think they'll accept you. They were looking the other way, anyway. When Jesus meets the disciples fleeing to Emmaus, they are running away. They've given up. They feel disappointed, disillusioned. Probably like many of your friends, and maybe some of your children. Those disciples running away, Luke 24, have given up on the church. And Jesus meets them. And he doesn't say, "You're wrong. Stop. You should be going to church every Sunday." He asks a brilliant question. He said, "What are you talking about? What's in your mind? What are you angry about? Share it." And that's how the conversation opens again. Or, to go back earlier, think of the first conversation in the Bible. What was the first conversation? It's after the fall. Adam's hiding in the bushes. And God says to him, where are you? It's not a request for information. He knows perfectly well where he is. His feet are probably sticking out from under the bushes. Where are you? Not, "You filthy scumbag, you betrayed me." And so God lures us with delicacy into conversation with him. When Wukash and I began this book, we had no idea that nearly all the conversations turned out to revolve around questions. As I said, "Where are you?" Or to Cain, "Where is your brother?" Or to Abraham, these three strangers who come, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Or to Elijah on the mountain, "What are you doing here?" He knows. Or in the New Testament, often questions we put to God. Mary to the Archangel Gabriel, "How can this be?" Or to her son, when he's lost in the temple, "Why did you do it to us?" Or Jesus to his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Or on the beach, after the resurrection, "Peter, Peter, do you love me more than these others?" So he is a questioning God. We called it questioning God, and it's deliberately ambiguous, because it's us questioning God and God questioning us. We couldn't capture that ambiguity, I'm afraid, in the other translations. Why questions? Because questions lead you deeper into a relationship with somebody else than flat statements. Questions lead you on in the adventure of being alive. And I think it's a sign of deep friendship that you share questions, as Rukesh and I did. C.S. Lewis said, lovers look at each other, friends look in the same direction. I quote, do you care about the same truth? The one who agrees with us that some question, little regarded by others, is of great importance, can be our friend. He need not agree about the answer. Or doubts. You know, when you're really close to somebody, you dare to share your doubts, the things that you struggle with. Did you ever read that wonderful novel by Graham Greene, Don Quixote, about this communist mayor and this Catholic priest who go on a mad journey together? And the priest says, it's odd how sharing a sense of doubt can bring people together, even more than sharing a faith. The believer will fight another believer over a shade of difference. The doubter fights only with himself. Now, many of these questions turn on identity. Who are you, God? Jacob wrestles with the stranger in the night and asks his name. Or Moses. If they ask me, what shall I say is your name? Or Jesus again, who do people say I am? But the question of God's identity is inseparable from our identity. Who we are, most deeply, is somebody addressed by God, summoned by God, invited by God. That's who we are. I don't know about in America. I suspect it's the same as in Britain. But we're obsessed with identity. National identity, gender identity, ethnic identity, political identity, sexual identity. And the temptation is always to think that identity is what you choose, like a consumer choice, what you construct, what you defend. I think Christianity is a much, much more interesting idea of identity, which is that it isn't chosen, it's discovered. As you say yes to the Lord, you discover who you are with the Lord, in the Lord. In the Bible, usually things begin when God calls somebody by name. Abraham, Moses, Elijah. And they reply with this beautiful little Hebrew word, Hineni, here I am. They remember Samuel. He gets called, he hears the voice, he goes 3 times to the priest and says, here I am, until Eli, the old priest, says, next time say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. When I was a young Dominican, I lived next door to the student master, Jeffrey. And one day I was going out of my room and I could have sworn I heard him calling me. So I opened the door and said, Jeffrey, did you call me? And quick as a flash he said, no, next time say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So we discover as we respond. Identity always lies ahead, never fully known. We can't know fully who we are because we're the friends of God and we don't yet fully know God. As St. John says somewhere, I'm afraid I've lost my place. Anyway, he says, we are the children of God now. What we are to be is yet to be revealed. But when we see him, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. When I was a young friar, I was always wondering what people think of me. Do they like me? Do they think I'm stupid? Who am I? As I grow older, do you know, I don't particularly care who I am. Who I am is yet to be revealed. I was really astonished. This is the great mistake of having a text. You get terribly lost. Learning to know God, learning to draw close, is learning to listen. And this is the heart of the synodal process. My first job as a chaplain was in London, and I was so excited. I was going to bowl these students over. I'd done 7 years of theology. I'd read so many books. I got a degree from Oxford. They would love everything I said. They would love my theology. They would admire me. They would love me. But it didn't happen. I realized that the ancient Benedictine who'd been chaplain before was obviously much better than I was. And it was quite a moment of crisis for me. And finally, I plucked up my courage and I took out 6 of them to the pub. Very Dominican solution. The order was founded in a pub. And I said, okay guys, tell me, what am I doing wrong? I don't remember what they said, but what I learned is that everything begins in listening. At that moment, everything changed. And 50 years later, they are among my best friends. They're all grandparents and retired, and I'm the only one who goes on working. I was really, really touched when Pope Francis volunteered to write a preface for the book. We didn't ask him. It's in the Italian edition, and it'll be in the new English edition. And he did so because Francis really believes that everything is about listening. This synod is about learning to listen, the art of conversation. That month in Rome, barriers began to fall because we listened to each other. Conversations in the Spirit. How can you talk to God if you can't talk to your neighbor? As St. John says, how can you love God who you cannot see if you don't love your brother or sister whom you see? So the media gave the impression that the synod was all about taking great decisions. The synod was about something much more profound, which is changing who we are, changing the church profoundly as a listening community. And then changes will happen, not because of a struggle for power, but because we've been transformed. Everybody sat around round tables, cardinals and bishops, with young people. The youngest delegate was a 19-year-old from Wyoming. Everybody had their chance to speak. Everybody had to listen. Friendships were made. People were changed. A wonderful archbishop who used to be very senior in the Vatican said to me, look at them. Look at all those Roman cardinals. They're having to listen. Listen to the baptized. And they might have looked around the table and thought, oh, all these rather terrifying female species, female members of the species. But after a bit, they saw people. Mary and Miriam and Laura and Bridget, fellow disciples like themselves. That will bring about a change. So my hope, to conclude at last, is that this little book will be encouraging in how we talk to God, how we listen to God, how we talk to each other. And if you find it boring, at least there are some nice pictures. Though none, I'm afraid, with parrots. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was great. Love this idea. We here at St. Clement, we've been reading this book of our leadership team that is titled God Honors Movement. And in many ways, the author, what he speaks about is that what God really is looking for is not the outcome, but the process of engaging. And you talk about this process, and it seems like that's what the Holy Spirit keeps calling all of us to do, is to recognize that God is present in the process that we engage with each other in prayer, accompaniment, just being a church together. So thank you for reminding us about it. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. We love your questions, but we'd like to ask them just because there are so many people. We'd love to actually come forward here to use the mic because it will enable everybody else to hear you.
The motto of the Dominican Academy in Baghdad is, here no questions are forbidden.
Great. Go for it. Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed that.
Yep.
Do you have any advice for learning to listen to God just in your daily life? Just because I think, at least like me personally, I think a lot of people I know, like the temptation, the problem runs into like, how do you listen to God despite the chaos of, you get up, you work all day, things go on and, whatnot. But it's also like, how do you make time for God despite, the nonsense of the day?
What's your name?
David.
Thank you, David. My experience is that the busier you are, the longer you need to have time for silence. Pope Francis is a busy man. He gives 3 hours a day for silence in the presence of God. And I can see a lot of feuds going on around. I think part of the art is being still. I was never very good at it, not very good at it still, but I had a great blessing of a fellow novice, and we went on holiday together, and I saw the importance of being still, quiet. Also, don't forget God can speak to you through other people. You put a question, you ask God a question, keep your ears open. He may well reply to somebody unexpected. So God will reply. Be confident. I love the fact, when Abraham has his conversation with the 3 strangers who come, Genesis 18, he's sitting at the door waiting. as if he expects God to turn up. Now, when we ask God for help, when we ask for some answer to a question, it's a good idea to sit at the door of the tent, expecting that he will answer. For instance, they're saying, well, I'm always asking God. He never replies, you know. Then one might not hear God when God speaks.
So I did get your book and cheated. I started at the end. And there's a great sentence in there: communication delights in differences. Otherwise, there'd be nothing to communicate. So I love to debate. My wife doesn't. I quoted your line to her this morning at breakfast. She said, "This is that English Dominican." It wasn't meant to be a compliment.
Is your wife Irish?
She is. So my question, seriously, is being good at asking questions. David Brooks has a book out. To get to know a person, you have to be good at asking questions, and you have to be good at listening. Precisely the points you made. And I think people will accept that. I think where you would know it better than I, people say, yes, but what about the fact that there is a truth? And Catholicism isn't either or, it's both. But having been at the Synod, you must have seen some of the tension between let's ask questions, let's listen, let's not lock down, let's not say, interesting, I understand you, you're dead wrong. But yet, there is a cry for, or there is some people articulate, listening is good, but then there is so how would you talk about reconciling those two?
I think that's absolutely the key question. The first thing is to believe that you may think somebody is wrong, but are they ever totally wrong? Can we discern the small truth that they offer us? In the General Council of the Dominican Order, when I was master, we had 14 people, 14 friars of 14 nationalities from 5 continents. And we had one rule. What your brother said was never rubbish. It may be wrong, misinformed, arrived at illogically, but there's always some grain of truth there. So when you disagree with somebody, the question is not how are they wrong, but how are they right? How do they speak the truth? There's always some, it may be very small. Somebody reacting to Pope Francis's views on gender dismissed them as misogynistic drivel. I was really angry. You can disagree, but you cannot rubbish another person. So you have to have a way of listening, which is certainly critical, truth-seeking, but open to the surprising truth that you don't have. Because orthodoxy is spacious. Heresy is narrow. And I think the question that you pose is actually one that's very, very much in the minds of the organizers of the next session of the Synod. The theologians were not really involved enough in the first session, because there are questions of truth. And you need, if you want, good theologians, lay people, men, women, experts. You need theologians will help us to dialogue with the past, with the tradition, with the Word of God. But that listening never should lead to relativism. What it should do is lead to what you might call a more expansive understanding of the truth. Aquinas talks about the expansion of the heart, the latitudo cordis, the opening up of the mind. And good dialogue doesn't lead us to be woolly. What I hope it does is the shepherd leads the flock out of the narrow little sheepfold into the spacious fields. And I think truth is certainly, there's falsity, but truth is broad. I hope that makes some sense, even though I'm English.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father, for the expansive discussion on being closer to God. My inquiry is about purpose and definition. The silence, and like finding the truth, leads to ambiguity. And sometimes, and a lot of times we seek purpose, direction. And that really leads to, finding the truth. And at some point, when there are facts that are assembled as truth, there should be conviction in how we act. We cannot sit down and take the wrongs in the world and simply say, be silent. We have to, as Christians, to be authentic in who we are. And there are a lot of, issues in the world that disturbs, very disturbing. And I feel that we just cannot sit down and do nothing. If the message is to be silent and listen all the time without listening, the listening can only go so far, without any conviction. And being authentic as Christians, every time we go to the Mass and we pray, we always go through what we think, what we speak, and what we do in our hearts makes us as authentic Christians. And being passive, brings us nowhere. There is a conflict there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I think conversation, listening, silence isn't about passivity. I think we need that silence in our hearts, that attentiveness to God, to prepare us to make the actions which are necessary. And you can see that with Pope Francis. Pope Francis is one of the most powerful advocates in facing climate change in the world. Many people say that now, for action for a just world, Pope Francis is the most powerful leader in the world. So you don't see passivity with Francis, but he acts after listening. He acts after hearing God in the first place, but also his fellow disciples. So you're absolutely right. Silence and listening, it doesn't stop there. You're completely right. It must lead to action. But you see, it's that contemplative quiet in our hearts that enables us to act well. Think of a painter. I think great painters know how to be very still, very quiet. And then when they paint, their action is sure, complete, because it springs from the silence in their life. So I think that there's no opposition between quiet silence and action. One is needed as a preparation for the other. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you, Timothy. Really appreciate you being here on your way back to London. My name is Mark. It's good to meet you. We face many questions in our day-to-day lives. Most of them, inconsequential to, the bigger question of God. And many of them even engineered to distract us and lead us away from that connection with other people, lead us towards differences in silos and bubbles that affect our role in many negative ways. My question is, how can we put into practice each day questioning of God that leads us closer to the most important questions versus those distractions that we face? Thank you.
Part of this, for me, I think we each have our own path, is we should engage with the most creative, stimulating questioners in our society. We don't want to remain in a Christian bubble. Who are the people in your society who are asking the most penetrating questions? The difficult questions, and we must get into conversation with them. It doesn't matter whether they're Christian or not. What matters is whether they're honest. I mean, I don't know about you. I love novels. I love the novels of Ian McEwan. I find them intensely stimulating. He's not a believer. That doesn't matter. He puts me on my toes. He opens questions which I must confront. I love films. Go to the best films. And so I would say we have to get out of a narrow Christian bubble and expose ourselves to the most pressing questions of our time. And don't be afraid of not being able to answer them. So often, and it's a temptation of us all, I've seen it in priests often, you don't want questions to which you don't know the answer. Because actually nothing happens until you don't know the answer. The creative moment is when you say, somebody asks you a question, and you say, I don't know. But I better start thinking, and I better start praying, and I better start searching. So I think there are all sorts of profoundly interesting questions circulating today. Sit at the feet of any teacher, and then they may sit at our feet. And again, this isn't relativism. St. Thomas Aquinas, who I'm required to speak of, and I have the provincial sitting there, making sure there'll be one mention of Aquinas in the course of the evening. Aquinas said, every truth is of the Holy Spirit, regardless who speaks it.
Just a follow-up and a plug for Thomas Aquinas as well. I mean, he gave up a post, a very luxurious and prestigious post to pursue truth, and thus became, a legend and a teacher of many for generations to come. How can we do that in our daily lives, given there's so many, distractions? Maybe it's in small ways. Maybe we can't abandon all of our responsibilities with kids and such, but
I think it happens in many forms. I mean, in the end, you got to fall in love. Yves Congar, great Dominican theologian, they call him the father of the Vatican Council. Yves Congar said, "I have loved the truth as I have loved the person." So we have to fall in love with the truth. And we may pursue it by painting or composing music or poetry or writing boring theological books. But what you have, each of us has their way, which maybe nobody else has, of falling in love with the truth. And of course, falling in love with somebody is also part of that. Because when we fall in love with somebody, then we are summoned into the truth by them. Because there can be no real love without truth.
I will take the last question.
I can see this is going to be a difficult one.
Thank you so much for being here, Father Timothy. When you talk about the truth, it seems to me that we are living in a world that I would say is filled with post-truth. In a world where I can say whatever I want to about the truth, you talk about the truth. How do I know what the truth is? Is it just for me?
No, I think that there is the truth, not just my truth and your truth, but the truth we never lay hold of totally. The truth is always beyond us. Even in this mad society, this post-truth world, fake news, crazy conspiracy theories, the most bizarre things, even in this world, the instinct for truth is not totally dead. It's there in every one of us. It may be a little seed, but it can be cultivated within each of us. That instinctive, we sense it, we know it. And people often who are entirely, apparently uneducated, they know it. They know when you're talking rubbish, and they know when you're saying the truth. I once read in a blog that when I was Master of the Order, I'd given permission to a provincial to live with his mistress, a nun, in a railway carriage. It wasn't true. She wasn't a nun. Sorry, bad joke. But there is, and you know it, your heart leaps up when you encounter the truth, particularly the truth that's embodied. It's embodied in someone. And when St. Oscar Romero came home one day to El Salvador, somebody from immigration looked at him and said, there goes the truth. He embodied it. He was terrified of dying, and even as he spotted the man who would shoot him, his body was covered with sweat, but he didn't run away. And I think the truth, our truth, became incarnate in someone. The Word became flesh. And in our society too, each of us can have the opportunity to be a little incarnation a little embodiment. And then the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it.
Thank you so much again, Father Timothy. This is actually for you.
I was wondering when I got it, but I prayed.
Miracle.
It's not really a fine wine. It's the best I can do with my prayer. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We love having you here this evening, and thank you for joining us. I know a lot of folks from different communities and parishes. Just thank you for joining us. We will continue into 2024 more on the conversations, especially one thing that I really want to put on your heart as an invitation before you go and get more drinks or food or the book is to join us in January. We'll have a 4-week series with Dr. Lisa Fortini Campbell, who is a professor at Kellogg at Northwestern. But Lisa will really invite us through this leadership course in January to really look into what would it mean for us to shift Jesus from everything into our lives to the foundation of our lives. So it will be this invitation to consider a 4-step journey to really be funded into the relationship with Jesus. And she has just an amazing and beautiful way to invite us into it. She spoke at our Theology on Tap this summer, and she really was the highest rated speaker, and a lot of young adults asked us to bring her back, so we are just overjoyed to bring her before she moves away from Chicago, actually. And so this is her last big speech before she moves to Tennessee. So we'd love to have her. It will be a 4-week series. And I'm sure it will be sold out, so we'd love you to sign up. It's already on the website. But it's just, it's interesting because it is a continuation of this dialogue of where is God present to us, how God keeps revealing himself to us. And what a great way to start 2024 is to dig in more into this wrestling together as a community and as friends with this question of God and God's presence in our lives. So we are delighted to have you. Thank you for coming, and blessed Christmas if we will see you before that.
I need to keep that tender. Thank you. Okay, that's right. No, whatever you, I mean, that's all.
Oh, it looks like it.
Well, if we can get it, he's still here. She is. She can hardly talk.
Thank you.